My name is Upman Ulal, and I'm at Columbia University, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our third such event. The strategy we've had for these events is that we want people to come and talk to us rather than us preaching to other people. So, contrary to that particular statement, I start off by talking to you. So that's sort of what's going on. The initiative that we have on America's Water got started a few years ago as a nascent initiative. And 2 years ago, we were successful in getting a grant funded from the National Science Foundation on America's Water. So that's the sponsor for this particular event. And the food was provided by PepsiCo Corporation. So we have two sponsors in that sense. And we have a large number of other groups that have been collaborating with us, and some of them are shown here. And I'll tell you a bit about the initiative and the motivation for it, and then we'll move to the rest of the program. So that's the plan. So the slides, this particular slide that you're seeing here, the title is the title of our NSF project. But what you're seeing on it is today's image for stream flow from the US Geological Survey on the left, today's image or yesterday's image for groundwater conditions in the middle, and on the right is a map prepared by Professor Naresh Devineni at the City College, who's a collaborator on our analysis of drought risk, particularly for multi-year drought risk across the country. So the reason I have this is contextualizing this because this is one of the issues we face. And as you can see, the drought is now moving into the Northeast, if you look at the streamflow picture right there. So we are not immune to this kind of behavior. It's just today's drought. It's not a long-term drought. So don't worry yet. Yeah. So moving forward, come on. Okay, there we go. Now too much. Okay, let's go back one. Here we go. Okay, so the way we've been framing this, unlike most groups that are doom and gloom, is that every issue you raise is actually a money opportunity for someone. And I would like to be in the position to capitalize on that money, but I haven't quite figured that out yet, so we'll get there. But the issues that we typically face here are imbalances between supply and demand. In another context, this is being called climate change. I don't understand quite why. The second issue is aging infrastructure. So this is the blowing up pipes that we hear about, and it's also the lead pipes that we have. So you heard all that. What you haven't heard so far is that there is this giant dam that is also 140 years old that is about to blow tomorrow, and you'll hear about it after the 150,000 people are killed by that dam, but not until then. That's the aging infrastructure story, and clearly another opportunity. You're not hearing that one right now, right? So then we have the floods and the water quality, health and safety issues with water, and where everybody seems to be getting stuck is how are we going to pay for all this? And so for that, we have from the Office of Management and Budget and the White House, Ali Zaidi, who was introduced as the money man, managing $100 billion in climate, energy, and water. So he's going to tell us all about that. But there's also a private sector role there. The things that people start talking about are our poor water efficiency, whether we are in urban systems with high losses or whether we are dealing with agriculture and water use, consumptive use in agriculture. So that's an opportunity. And then clearly, to be able to do all this, we need to have information, and that's another opportunity area that many people are capitalizing on. And the last thing I've put there is, if we talk about a lot of these things, the theme I'm going to push is, it's not urban strictly, and it's not agricultural strictly, and it's not energy strictly. It's the ability to create transactions across those groups where the opportunity really lies. And that's the legal and regulatory framework that is a bit of an obstacle there. So that's, in a nutshell, the framing, and I should stop now, but I won't. So the first product here is something Michelle in our group has developed, and it's a reconstruction of the last 500 years of stream flow. And this is a stroboscopic Rorschach test to see how dirty your minds are, particularly thinking of the Republican presidential contest nowadays. But the point I'm driving at here is what you're seeing here is red and blue alternately flashing as you go through this. So what people miss is they focus on, I'm having a drought in California as an event in itself. They don't focus on the fact that when the drought in California is over and California gets wet, there's another place systematically getting dry. And we go through these cycles in space and time. And if you are focused on the local picture, you miss the national picture. And this is America's water. So we are going to throw that at you, okay? And the question is, what does that imply in terms of our strategies for managing these kind of things from a national scale, where that conversation at the moment is simply not happening, okay? The right-hand side of that graphic is a drought reconstruction from Ed Cook at the Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory, also 500 years. And what I want to highlight there is there were major droughts across the country of duration 48 years and 21 years. The longest droughts in the 20th century were 10, 12 years. And so we've been really mild in terms of what our historical record is, and whether or not you're a believer in climate change, this is an issue that we have to figure out what we want to do about. This graphic here is also developed by Naresh, and the purpose of this is yet different. That was the climate story. Then we need the human story, and I don't know how I'm going to launch this with this device because, okay. All right, we'll just tell you what the story is, and we won't worry about the animation. Basically, what Naresh did here is he keeps the climate as the climate is, and then he brings in the agricultural strategy we have had in the country. As the crops come in, what you see is that the Midwest becomes red in this particular picture, starting in the 1970s. In the 1970s, we passed a farm bill whose goal was to create equity across all farmers. So if farmer A has a much more severe climate, the federal government gives them a bigger subsidy to grow crops than farmer B, who doesn't have as bad a climate. So the story that emerges from that is, so crops move to where the subsidy went, and so we have hammered groundwater in those areas. And that's what shows up in this analysis if I was able to run the animation. And on the right, what this shows is the resilience with the cropping strategy that has happened on the left bar graph, and what it was if you had preserve the historical cropping pattern. So the point I'm making here is you can either look at this story as one where the crops really screwed us over, or you can look at it as a story where there's a grand opportunity to move the crops and get rid of this problem, okay? So if I think about droughts, one of the mechanisms we have used in the past is storage. So we built reservoirs, and the top left picture shows you that we stopped building reservoirs in the 1970s. Coincidentally with changing the cropping pattern. Very nice, right? So we end up with drawing down groundwater, which is the groundwater extraction picture here, and on the right, you have the depletion that has happened. And the basic point here is that if you draw down your groundwater, then you have a drought in the future. It's going to be very expensive to deal with that particular issue, or you're basically just done. So here, the question is that the motive that we used in the early part of the 20th century was building large centralized infrastructure, multi-purpose dams. We haven't done that for a long time. Is this an opportunity, if you want to deal with this, for distributed infrastructure, cities and localities, or are we dealing with demand reductions substantially, or are we dealing with going back to another phase of building large infrastructure? That's the national question, and it's not being particularly debated in my view. The aging infrastructure story comes next. So what we have is an estimated 250,000 main pipes blowing up on a regular basis because they're old. Okay, and we also have lead, and that lead is everywhere. So we have to come up with a strategy for this, and the estimate is in the $1 trillion range for what we have to do here. This is presented as an urban issue, and as I said, we can look at it from the large infrastructure point of view, and we have the same issue there. It's just not getting talked about nearly as much. So if we come to the urban issue, here's a few things to throw at you. As groundwater is being drawn down, utilities in the urban sector, and the drawdown of groundwater is happening both by agricultural users and by large cities. So as the groundwater goes down, people have started shifting to a mix of surface water and groundwater, and as they do that, the cost goes up, okay? So we have that story to begin with, and that's illustrated here across the country. And then if you look at what actually has been happening with the utilities in the last few years, the rate of increase of the water prices is about 2 to 3 times the rate of inflation on average. However, the rate at which debt is increasing is double the rate of the rate increases. So that's pretty exciting because that leads to a very nice conclusion, as you can imagine, okay? So what we also see in this story is that people are trying to improve water efficiency and conservation and so forth, but the net result of that is that the revenue of the utility goes down with each of those measures, but they have significant fixed costs which are not changing because the infrastructure was sized for a particular setup, Okay, so we can either groan on that or think of a long-run strategy as to, is this an opportunity as we are doing replacement of the big pipes and all other things, can we systematically design a new infrastructure for the 21st century that is sensible? So to summarize here, the way I see it is the first major opportunity is at the intersection of all of these things, water, energy, agriculture, ecosystems, and city. We have goals for each of those. They require money and they require legal changes. And examples of some of these things are, if we do precision agriculture, this costs money for the agriculturalists to implement, but this could optimize water, energy, nutrient, so we would meet our food security goals. That would not be an issue. Who pays for the investment in getting to precision agriculture? So one possibility is that a city, which is considering desalination, actually pays for this thing and ends up with a contract so that they can acquire that water. So we would get cross-sectoral interaction and efficiency out of that. The water storage opportunities are similar. We could build dams, or if you're going to do managed aquifer recharge, if you think about it, and if you're the city, an ideal location for recharging the aquifer would be upstream of you, which is typically a rural area. So again, you have to make a deal with someone as to how you're going to do that. We could come up with water banks like California has had, and I think the utility of those would be significantly improved if these were insurable. So there's contracts that the water bank gives out, but these contracts recognize that there's a probability that you're not going to be able to supply water. But if that's something that can be computed and it can be insured. So that brings in the financial risk management or financial instruments directly into managing this game, which is also something that is not happening today. The last point here is that if you're doing large-scale clean energy or renewable energy investments, you have to think about the fact that either they are displacing existing thermal energy sources for producing electricity, and hence you have the water that was being diverted for them becoming available, or you're avoiding having to do that in terms of the obligation to do that. So that water is also available. How do you monetize that across these sectors? So these are things that I feel are opportunities. Then coming to the city level, we can look at a variety of things, but the basic idea that many people are talking about, which I think is very sensible, is how do you close the loop on the urban water cycle? So you capture rainfall. Instead of having a combined sewer overflow problem, you actually capture that rainfall for use. You have point-of-use treatment, so you can now use that storm water plus water that's being generated at site to do this. You can capture other things off of that. To do this, the question is, are the existing utilities set up to do this? What would be the kind of changes that would be required to change all this? So these are just a few perspectives quickly to throw out at you. And what we hope to do in this event with your help is to start working towards a water roadmap for the United States. There's energy roadmaps people have talked about. There are water maps for achieving water quality standards in the state of Minnesota, for example. So on small scales, people are doing some of these things. But in terms of having a national strategy, having a concerted effort between industry, universities, and the public sector to focus on these larger issues and move the ball with a roadmap which says, these are standards we wish to attain. Everybody agrees on what is interoperable across those standards, but then companies and universities can work together to come up with a short-term and long-term research map and an implementation strategy, because without that, this is not going to work. So what we are hoping that we can do with your help is start moving the conversation in that particular direction so that as we get together this afternoon and subsequently by reducing our carbon footprint electronically, we can make progress towards this so that over a 2-year time frame, we can lay out exactly what we think can be done over a 2030 time frame. Thank you. I'll stop with that, and I'll invite Ali to come and talk to us. So Ali Zaidi is at the White House, and he's remarkable. He was introduced, as I said, as the money man at the event at the White House Summit the other day. He didn't really get a chance to talk because it ran over time. So I'm telling him that today he has a chance to talk to us and tell us his perspectives. And I'm eager to hear what you have to say.
Thank you. Thanks for that intro. It's always daunting to be introduced as the money person when someone has previously put the number $1.7 trillion on a slide.
We have to give you a challenge, right?
That's right. Wait till I turn the challenge right back at you. It's good to be here, and thank you, Professor, not just for your leadership on pulling together this conversation, but for your research and for all the work that extends beyond the United States as well, ensuring that water really is treated as the human right that it is, and that from the first world to the developing world, we can ensure that people are getting clean, sustainable sources of water and access to that. It's fitting, I think, with the season to be here today talking in an event that seems to have been arranged in the key of optimism. This is a big and complex problem, but it seems like we're here not just to observe the problem and its complexity, but rather figure out a path to progress. And that's exactly what's needed, and I'm more and more convinced that it's something that's possible. Progress on water, I think, is really pushing on something with wheels. And if I had any anxiety that hypothesis wasn't true, our convening earlier this week at the White House on water, on fittingly World Water Day, revealed the enthusiasm of folks across sectors and across levels of government to step up to the plate and take action to really start to address the challenge that we have in front of us. There were, I think someone said maybe that it was the longest fact sheet in the history of this administration. If that's not true, I'd like to see the longer one. But certainly we had commitments from more than 150 commitments from organizations that were incredibly diverse, academic institutions, folks in different parts of the private sector, people who have been in the water business for a really long time, and people who are brand new to it. And in particular, there was a focus on investment and innovation. $5 billion is a modest down payment to whatever the top line number is, but there was a recognition that we could do better when it came to investing in breakthrough R&D and in leveraging the capital that's already flowing into water infrastructure in a smarter way, and to get more done. So that's, I think, what the path to progress kind of looks like. It looks like people coming together from across stakeholders, showing up with their unique sets of assets, whether it's dollars or it's scientific expertise or it's data, and helping address what is a clearly big and complex challenge. The other thing for me that the White House summit revealed, and this was intentional, but it became more palpable than the concept when we were putting the event together. And that is that water is this space that's occupied by a broad set of stakeholders and storylines. There are people for whom water is part of their culture, their religious practice. There are trust responsibilities in the United States that run with water. For others, water is the critical ingredient to their business, their ability to manufacture the product that they sell either to a domestic or international market. Some people approach water as a environmental justice and equity issue. Some approach it as a growth issue for the macroeconomy. So it was very clear, and it was in a way that was more palpable and tangible than we had expected. Again, that there are so many stakeholders and so many storylines when it comes to our water system. Today, I kind of want to just focus on one set of those stakeholders and storylines, recognizing that there is a bunch that I will then not be talking about. And that set of stakeholders and that storyline is around innovation, both in terms of technology and in terms of finance. For those who were at the Water Summit, I'm still taken by this anecdote that I think is particularly relevant here in New York City, but it's a reminder that this storyline is a long standing storyline here in the United States. So for those who are Broadway fans, Hamilton has been inescapable, I think, the buzz around the musical. And it's reminded people of this guy, Aaron Burr. What's not a subject of Hamilton, the show, is that Aaron Burr founded the Manhattan Company, actually in the wake of public health issues in the city of New York, as a way to provide some of the first financing for the water system here in New York City. And the brilliant technology that they deployed was hollowed out tree trunks to move the water around. And it dealt with the issue that was facing them in that day. I think that's an important reference point in a system where, frankly, the financing hasn't matured a whole ton more. And I think we need more innovation there. You're seeing more people access the bond market. But one of the exciting parts of the summit on Tuesday was Ceres and a set of other players coming together and really articulating a clear set of standards so that the public markets can be accessed in a way that's a lot different than the way water is financed today. And second is this sort of notion of technology in the infrastructure that we have and that we use in the United States. I mean, tree trunks sounds kind of dumb, but what's maybe more shocking is that we have pipes that have lead in them, or that we have pipes in the country that allow us to waste every single day 7 billion gallons of water that's been cleaned and treated already. That doesn't make a ton of sense given the technology we know we have and certainly could access. So the storyline is a long-standing one, but I think there's a tremendous opportunity to make progress. So I want to tick through that opportunity and sort of cut through it in three different ways. First is really how, as the federal government, as the administration, when we think about the predicate here, what sort of pushes us to move past the status quo and toward a faster pace of innovation, sort of lay out the case. And I think it squares very much with what we just ticked through a little bit before. The second is to talk about the playbook for progress in the innovation space. I don't think we're starting brand new, and we have, I think, a couple of really great models that we can rely on if we want to make the sort of progress that I think is needed. And finally, regardless of what playbook you've got, there are certain steps you can take to pave the path forward, and those are the sets of incentives and the friction in the market that I think, again, we've sort of alluded to, and I want to dig into a little bit more. So the predicate, I think, is pretty clear to most folks. I will be more direct about the climate point. The climate is changing. I think there is a near consensus on that point. You really have to look to find someone who disagrees with that. And the first problem with that is that it's without investing in the adaptation that we need to invest in, it pulls the economy back. In California, you saw in just 2015, $2.7 billion of loss, 20,000 jobs impacted. And the second sort of piece of that is, of course, it doesn't pull on everybody in the same way. Water issues fall hardest upon those who have the hardest time adapting, who don't have the means to be able to deal with the challenge that the pressure of climate or other development pressures put on the water system. So the first part of the predicate is, if we don't take action, we're setting up something that's going to both pull the economy back, but then also pull back a set of people who are most vulnerable and most unable to adapt to the pressures that are being put on the system. The second, and I don't want to overstate this, but the second is that, innovation's sort of standing still in large parts of the water system. By comparison, you've seen huge investment and huge transformation in the clean energy sector. We have 30 times more solar deployed than in the beginning of this administration. And today, in the sort of R&D investment, clean energy, at $50 of clean energy R&D investment for every $1 that goes into water innovation. So there's a huge disparity given the fact that you're talking about two sets of things you can't ignore. You can't live without electricity, and you can't live without water. It doesn't really make a ton of sense for us to not be stepping up to the plate when it comes to investment in water innovation. So failing to take action means innovation stands still. Maybe the economy gets pulled back. The only thing that seems to be speeding ahead in the take no action reference case is the changing climate. And the impact of that domestically is felt across sectors, and internationally that spills over into geopolitical risk. The intelligence community, the DoD, others have talked about how water scarcity and the failure to have the right technology and planning in place globally is a threat multiplier and accelerator. So that's the predicate. I don't know how much more compelling it could get. It touches people, it touches the economy, it touches our national security, it touches our public health. So failure to take action in an aggressive and ambitious way seems to just not be an option for the United States. So now you got the predicate, and the question is, do we have a playbook for progress here? Is there a way to go about innovation in an aggressive and ambitious way that has been proven out? And there, I think clean energy and energy efficiency are almost a perfect example for how we could go about innovation in the water space. So the first is around data. When we started out in this administration, very few Americans had access to their utility data. Now, through a utility sector-led partnership called Green Button, nearly everybody has access to their utility data. Now, not everybody's using it yet, but more and more entrepreneurs are stepping up with ways to allow consumers to use that data to save money, to be able to sell essentially efficiency back to the grid, to get paid by their utility companies for the avoided cost that efficiency represents. Energy, of course, 7 years ago, we were starting with a system where that data existed, where the utilities had that data, where it was collected. And what we needed to put forward were a set of standards and an ability for users to start to access it and interface with it in a common and predictable way. In the water arena, unfortunately, we're starting a little bit further behind. And the steps between now and being able to get our water usage data on our iPhone and be able to make changes in our water usage over 1 minute or 15-minute intervals there may be more steps between here and there than there were in energy. But the technology is very similar. And the consumer appetite is there. So I think one thing we're focused on is using the federal government's data sets and assets to be able to push more of the data out into the market. And that starts to take away some of the asymmetry and the other sort of knowledge-related failures in the market that continue to sort of buttress this undervaluing of the commodity. The second is related, and this is getting the data out there is going to be emboldened by or is going to be the, I think, impetus for greater tapping of the efficiency opportunity. So as we rolled out our water innovation strategy in December at the White House, we sort of put a marker out there that we thought 33% efficiency was achievable in the system. That, by the way, has the side benefit of taking 90 million metric tons of CO2 out of the atmosphere. And I think the reason we feel this is possible is because, one, we've seen sectors of the economy over the last several decades do this very thing with water. In dairy, water usage has gone down 65%. In cotton, it's gone down 75%. You now have the Water Sense label from EPA, which parallels the Energy Star label from EPA, that allows you to buy home appliances that provide that sort of level of significant water savings. But tapping the efficiency opportunity is more than just putting the technology out there, and it's more than just investing in new technology around efficiency. It's got to recognize that for consumers to want to pick the $20 up off the sidewalk, you've got to take away all of the friction between the consumer and the $20 on the sidewalk. So, one, they need the information. They probably need it pushed to them. Second, you've got to make it clear that that $20 is actually able to be captured by them. If they're saving water, but they're not being able to recover that in any way, or the water's valued so low that the savings don't actually reflect the true savings that the consumer is responsible for, that's going to be a problem. And so I think we look as an administration to the demand response market as an analogy for how you might have a more efficient water system. Is there a way for us to take the cost of the new water infrastructure and translate that into avoided cost that can then go back to consumers, whether in the industrial, commercial, or in the residential sector, and allow them to capture that benefit? Again, the data will be critical to be able to move those savings to the consumer. But this is something we've got to be pretty relentless about going after. And again, this is something that's worked in pretty remarkable fashion in the energy arena. And then finally, similar to energy, where we didn't sort of stop our clean energy playbook by just getting people to use less electricity. We came up with new supplies of electricity that were cleaner. The federal government is focused on new technology that provides new supply to the market. And so that's going to come in a lot of different forms. And one of them that we've focused on in our budget and that we're working on now with a number of agencies, with the Department of Energy, with NSF and others, is clean desal. So desal technology over the last several decades has seen significant decline in cost, but we're still at around $2 a cubic meter, and not where we need to be. And so what we've set forward is a aggressive roadmap modeled after our solar agenda that we set out in 2011 that focuses on reducing the cost of renewable desal by 4x, that looks at reductions of energy use by 3x, and then ultimately reduces the CO2 footprint as well. So there, again, I think it looks ambitious, and I remember being in Secretary Chu's office when we were kicking around ahead of right before a State of the Union, kicking around whether setting a sunshot target that was as aggressive as it was on solar was reasonable. We wanted to make solar at cost parity with traditional sources of energy by 2020. And I think there were a lot of folks in the room who said, well, you don't want to set yourself up for failure. And clearly government can't do this alone, so maybe we should only set the target that we can accomplish by ourselves. And we sort of discarded those criticisms with the view that we had confidence in the ability of the government to partner with the private sector, with engineers and entrepreneurs, and forge forward by laying out a clear path with technical targets and an appreciation for how we were going to go systematically through the full stack of costs, whether it's balance of systems or the different parts of the hard costs of solar. And by laying that path out, we've been able to make progress ahead of pace. We're 60% of the way to our goal, and we've been able to do it with the private sector, with even states and local governments focusing on what they can do through reduction in balance of systems costs. So I think the new technology play, especially in terms of supply, has to be a critical part of the playbook that we use. I think the last sort of piece of it is really paving the path forward for those technologies to take root in the market. So sure, you've got better efficiency technology and more data and knowledge out there, and you have new supply technology. But if you're still valuing water inefficiently or at zero, then you're probably not going to have a thriving adoption or deployment of efficiency or new supply technology. And that's why part of what we're doing as a federal government is also supporting the development of new market models, things that go after the specific problem of the fragmentation of water and the cross-sector uses of it. So how do we create, I mean, it's a little bit ironic, but how do you create liquidity in the water market How do you allow the reduction of use in an ag application to finance a desal unit that might be providing peaker capacity, which is then supported by peak rates for high users in the commercial sector? That's a pretty complex thing. And again, that's a place where the energy sector had a head start. But one of the things the energy sector didn't have was an appreciation for the cost of CO2. And that's been a place where there's been a lot of innovation over the last several decades. Reggie is an example of that. And so I think one of the things you need is the development of a better set of market mechanisms, and NSF is doing that on sort of the smaller scale with Mammoth Trading is a good example where the NSF supported a grant to help folks, especially in the ag sector, trade essentially water rights and use, and help create a fuller appreciation of the value of the commodity. So one, you just got to make the transactions easier. The second is we've got to go after the cost of capital associated with deploying the technology we have, and that's going to come from the market understanding the performance of these technologies in the way that the market started to understand the performance of renewable and efficiency technology. So that's another place where we're focusing and making sure there's greater awareness and greater appreciation for the performance characteristics of the technologies that exist. And the sort of final piece of paving the road is leveling the playing field for new technology and for efficiency, and that means not allowing it to be the best kept secret. It's getting the information to consumers, and it also means convincing the set of stakeholders who are the incumbents in the field to appreciate that this is going to be something that's frankly going to be more economic, more efficient than some of the other ways of doing business. So I think taken together, the predicate, the playbook that we have from clean energy, and what are really within reach ways to pave the path for progress, we have a reason to be optimistic about being able to tackle this big and complex challenge. I had an opportunity to join the U.S. delegation for the Paris climate talks in December, and a lot of the agreement and a lot of the conversation going in was obviously focused on emissions and the air. And that's obviously the making the problem worse side of the ledger. But then there's the problem already exists and the impact side of the ledger. And the thing that was remarkable to me was how many countries around the world were focused on dealing with the impacts and how much water was the medium through which they felt climate, whether it was surging water or whether it was the scarcity of water. Water was the medium through which they felt the impacts, in the same way that air and energy were the way that people thought about and gravitated towards the solutions to reduce and mitigate our greenhouse gas profile. And I think there was not only an appreciation for how great the impacts were already, but also an appreciation for how much worse it could potentially get, and the role technology could play. Walking through the various country booths, one of my favorite demonstrations was at the Korean booth, where they had a renewable desal model and a set of folks there who were excited to tell you that this is something we needed to be investing in. We in Paris, in addition to the agreement, the president pulled together a set of 20 countries and 28 billionaires who signed up for mission innovation on clean energy. All of these countries pledged that over the next 5 years they would double the amount they were spending on clean energy, R&D. I think that as a country and as a world, we've got to probably up our game on water innovation as well. And that's both in terms of the dollars, but it's also in terms of thinking about how we do that research. We've stood up an ARPA for energy. We have an EIA for energy. Are there needs for things like that? Are we doing research in as compelling and efficient of a way as possible? So I'll conclude with the optimistic note that I started on, but with the admonition to myself and to everyone in the room that, you know, there are a lot of different responses you can have to a challenge as big and complex as the one we face. One of those responses is hopelessness. The second response, which is not the same as hopelessness, is to have hubris about it and think you've got the silver bullet that's going to solve the problem. And I think we would be mistaken to approach this challenge either with hopelessness or with hubris. And instead, I think we need to approach it with the humility to know that there are going to be different solutions in different places, that we're going to have to listen to all the stakeholders and hold together all the storylines, even when we're trying to push on one set of tools. And then ultimately that we are justified in being hopeful about our ability to solve the problem because we've come together as a world on climate. We've come together as a world on clean energy. There's no reason we can't come together and propel forward the water innovation that we need to rise to the challenge that we face on water. So eager to hear the panels and thrilled that the panels are both focused on the problem but also on the pragmatic path for progress forward. So thank you.